describe how I've been having my practice and why I've been doing things. I've been doing things the way I've been doing. I'm like, oh, it's because this is sort of ingrained, or there's an actual explanation for it.
Yeah, that's sort of how I felt about it.
You know, what I think is interesting too is intuition. And, you know, we, as nurses, I think we sometimes realize that we have intuition. We're not really sure where it came from. But I was reading one time about intuition, that there's all this stuff that we've learned, and not everything can be at the top of your mind. But like when something comes up, it sparks it. And so you have all these linkages sometimes that are subconscious, but they come out. And it's almost like an intuition where you put all the pieces together. And I think that happens with nursing theory too. It's like, it's back there from early days when we started in nursing, and we've had so many experiences build up. And then when we come back and revisit it, we have these whole new insights, which I think is pretty awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You know, I think that the group presentations on every theorist that you had selected, I love that. I felt like it was so useful, and I'm one of those people that have to read things like 3 or 4 times before I get it when it comes to books. But the way everyone presented, it was engaging. I actually enjoyed it a lot, and I don't know, I think that's a great project. I think that's definitely something that's really awesome that you do in the class. So I appreciate that.
I love that feedback. That's so helpful for me as an instructor to hear, because at first I was not sure. Like, we had to go through so many things to get people into groups and to arrange it, but I am so glad that it worked, and I really enjoyed them too. I thought everybody did a great job. That was really cool.
It's definitely a good project.
Mm-hmm. It's nice to get out of just reading the text and being a little more interactive, and also bouncing ideas off one another in your group, and, you know, trying to gain a deeper understanding of those theories. It's nice to have somebody right there to be like, is this how you take it? Is this how you understand?
That's really cool.
No, I think that's true.
Did you guys actually meet in person to do the project?
Not my group.
Yeah.
No, I'm in Montana, so I'm hard.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Kentucky recently, but we used a lot of the discussion postings and text messages. They were amazing. I was just like, text me with anything. I have my laptop the whole time. Even if I was at the hospital, I just take it out. So
nice. Really nice. Well, I thought I would just start off by showing you a little video, just to like a little bit of inspiration of nurses over the generations, and then we'll tackle some of the questions in the week, or if you guys have any questions you want to bring up, we'll go there. So let me just share my screen to show you this.
They are there at our birth. They are there through wellness. It is hard to find a person whose life has not been touched by a nurse. They are there at our birth. They are there through wellness, illness, recovery, and loss.
Adversity and disease comes no matter how rich or how poor you are. It's being able to bear witness to that couple who's had a baby and it's not the perfect baby, or the baby dies. Or a young woman who's just finished her college degree and got her first job, and she feels a lump in her breast, and she's 29 or 30, and you tell her she's got cancer.
But how much do we know about these people who become a vital part of some of the most difficult and intimate moments in the human experience? Who are nurses? What do they really do? If you ask most people, be they patients, doctors, community members, policymakers, to describe what nurses do, they have a difficult time. It seems easier to describe the way they make someone feel. They might use words like compassionate, caring, and supportive.
Nursing is critical because we don't put barriers on how we engage. You can do this work and you can engage at a visceral, soul-to-soul level in a therapeutic way. Lori had a profound impact on me, and she just really showed me the power that one person can have. In just one day, that moment absolutely changed my path in my life.
But these feelings that are so easily remembered stand upon a complex world full of science, critical thinking, clinical judgment, communication, research, education, leadership, and innovation. Is nursing a job? A profession? A calling?
I like that.
Sorry. I'm just putting my earphones on because they're watching the baseball game in the other room. And if it goes crazy, I didn't want you. But to play the video, I got to take the earphones out.
Yes, I've read all of them, and I'm probably
I chose that video because I thought there's so many faces of nursing. And when we're studying these theorists, they're all coming maybe from their own point of view. And you're obviously coming from your point of view. And then they're putting their theory together, whatever way makes sense for them. So, I struggled with this first question, and I'm really interested in what you think. What do you think is the process of developing these theories for practice or a model?
I was wondering that, and I've been wondering that from the beginning when we started delving into these theories. How does one develop a theory? How does one get the credentials to do so, or how does one get the idea, and how does it become an actual theory? And I have no idea.
I think that section, I think it was chapter 3, where that gave you kind of the questions into helping you think of what your own theory would be. I thought that was really helpful. Some of the questions for me were like, huh? But I don't know. I think what it comes down to is you have to be passionate about something, whatever you're trying to change or whatever you're trying to put out there in the world. When you're truly passionate about something, then things become easier. I tell people, like, my little sister wants to join nursing, and I said, unless you're passionate about it, you're not going to survive nursing school, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm assuming that these amazing theorists, that's exactly what it was. They saw an area that they could change, bring on positive change for patients, and being so involved in it, I think that makes it easy. Now, if I try to do it, it may take me many, many years. But seeing other nurses being able to do it and seeing what a great impact it has, I don't know. I think it's
awesome. I think you're both right on with this, because I do think it comes from that deep reflection where you start with yourself and asking all of those questions and seeing your practice, and then how you want to help others to maybe see it more clearly, but also how you want to give care, and how you structure your own framework in your mind so that you can provide care in a more clear way. Maybe at the end, I just thought of it and I haven't prepared it. I'd have to pull it up. But I did start developing a theory for practice. It's a very different theory in a very different realm. But, maybe it'll be interesting to see it because it came out of research. And so it came from that perspective of researching an area of practice and then from that putting together the theory. Still in the process. I can't say it's done because I do agree it can take many years. But it's certainly evolving for me. But I think your thoughts have helped me in that way too, just to think, okay, it's an evolution, and it does start from that deep reflection. It can also start from research or from finding that maybe there's a better way to care for our patients. I think maybe I think when we look at Roy or Sister Callista Roy, she was like that middle range and had all those different pieces, when we were looking at it and really trying to categorize things. And the medical model in itself is a theory, but more for medicine, but just to categorize a way to look at the body. Nursing, I think, is much more varied in some ways than medicine. And we have, we have many more faces in a lot of ways. I don't know.
Do you find that your theory that you're developing, was that derived from another theory, or was that inspired by another theory, or is this sort of your creation?
I don't think it was inspired so much by another theory. I think it was inspired by my practice and my work and then doing the research. But I do think now when I'm looking back that I definitely had influences, and the influences were both from, maybe nursing theorists, but also just in general, life in general. Like in that last assignment where we had the ways of knowing, and we applied it both professionally and personally. There was a whole big discussion that you guys didn't see between the instructors, because one of the instructors thought, why are we asking them for personal application? This is all about nursing. And they tried to take that piece out of the assignment because there's like 5 or 6 sections going on. And then the other nursing instructors were like, no, it's part of who the person is and who they are as a nurse. And so there's like this long discussion. Well, you guys
are they really?
Discussion. Yeah. So
I thought that was interesting to see that overlap for sure of your personal experience and the nursing experience, because I feel like there is so much overlap. Much like Maria was saying earlier, you have to have that passion, and that's sort of intrinsic, right? And I think that that's what makes nurses great, is that their personalities sort of jive with the profession.
Yep. It is so.
No, in that sense, I agree.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, in that sense, I agree, because a lot of the way I'm a nurse, honestly, it comes from my background, the things that my grandma taught me, respect and love and kindness. And I feel like a lot of that has influenced my practice as a nurse. So finding the foundation, finding the source of where that came from, I think that's important. And plus, you can relate to it more. I can be like, oh, okay, yes, this is how I am, and I can see that connection between my personality, my personal life, and nursing. That's just my personal opinion, what I got out of it. And so I'm really glad that you were supportive of saying, no, this is actually very vital and an important piece, because I don't know, to me, again, this is me personally, theory is complicated. It's something I'm not familiar with. And being able to sort of like bring my life and my nursing practice and then applying to what I'm learning, it helps me understand. Maybe it doesn't to others, but I felt like I could relate to it more, and I could understand it more and see how, wow, these two things really do go together.
Yeah. I felt the same way, and I thought it was really beautiful how people did weave those pieces together. And it made it richer. It made it, more personal, because it is all about us being people and humans, and we're relating with these other humans on our planet to create a healthier space. So I did just pull up my slides. Do you want to see a little bit of this?
Yeah, I'd love
Okay. Okay. And by the way, I'm on a time delay because I'm on a satellite connection because it was the best connection going on. I'm in Maine right now. So if there's a slight delay in what I'm saying and what you hear, that's what's going on. Let me share my slides. Okay, so I was an Air Force flight nurse, and I did military aeromedical evacuation. So this is a very different type of job. I had a grant where we looked at Air Force aeromedical evacuation of combat casualties after 9/11. So AE, I'm going to say AE instead of aeromedical evacuation. It's in the Air Force, but it supports all the services. And this is an area of practice where we evacuate patients by fixed wing aircraft. So it's very different than what we see in life flight, where it's just sort of scoop and run and maybe just 1 or 2 patients. We can have up to 100 patients in an airplane, and we will have 2 nurses and 3 techs. So it's a very different environment. And you can then be in the airplane with your patients for actually pretty routinely, usually about 10 hours. But it can be anywhere from a couple hours to 12 hours that you're going to be on board with your patients. And then there's a few hours before and a few hours afterwards. So it makes for a really long day. And what's very unusual, this is an old slide, so it's back from 2005, but you can see they were evacuating 28,000, approximately anywhere from over 28,000 patients a year in the beginning. And that's a lot of patients to be moving. And the United States is actually the only country that has this really large capability to move that many patients. So this is just sort of a little snapshot of all the different types of things going on. There might be some background noise, so if you can mute, that might help. Actually, I think I can mute you. I did it, is that right? Okay, so the specific aims of the study were to describe the AE experience and then to develop theoretical constructs for combat casualty aeromedical evacuation. And, this is actually a really good picture of what it is that we do. And for a lot of times, like when I did this, we would be living, I'm an older nurse, and so I was in Bosnia, and we would actually live in country in Bosnia. And then we would air evac the patients to Germany, but then, and from Germany, they would air evac them back to the United States. But it was for us, when I did it, and this is not unusual, I think, even in Iraq today or Afghanistan, is that the plane comes in, it never turns off its engine. So the engines are running, you have a lot of noise, it's usually in the dark or in really bad weather, really dusty, a lot of times on a dirt strip, and all this stuff is coming off the airplane for the troops, and then you're recreating a hospital in the plane and creating stanchions, dropping straps, putting up all your medical equipment, running electric, running oxygen lines, setting up your area. Then you bring on the patients and you get everybody settled, and then you take off, and that all has to happen in 30 minutes. From the time the plane lands, getting everything off, creating a hospital ship, getting everybody back on and going is generally 30 minutes. So it's a really fast pace environment. So what I used in this theoretical framework is I mostly used utilization-focused evaluation. I had an advisory panel that weighed in and was interactive throughout the research process to make sure that it was in keeping with what the actual practice was. And then I used grounded theory and a constant comparative analysis of the data. We did focus groups at 8 of the aeromedical evacuation squadrons, active duty, reserve, and guard. And there are only 31 squadrons, so 8 was a really good representation. And then we did a lot of field notes, we transcribed them. I developed this whole process and of doing this parallel analysis. So that was something I did that was a little bit different in that. And I still need to sort of publish that method. And then these patterns and themes emerged. I don't know if you recognize this lady, but this is Marilyn Ray. And she developed a theory of bureaucratic caring. That was me in my flight suit. There's Dr. Ray. Marilyn Ray was actually teaching at the University of Colorado a long time ago and teaches also at FAU. Beautiful theory of bureaucratic caring. And she was one of my mentors in this project. And we adapted grounded theory into this group approach. And then this is what it looks like. This was my picture of the world back then. Although I didn't have such a nice light plane. Usually my plane was dark and dusty and leaked. But it was going in that direction. And then this is what another picture of this type of delivering of care. And so when I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, I always wanted to check the box. Hey, I'm a military nurse, an Aerovac nurse, whatever. But there's no certification. There was nothing for that. So I started developing a theory for practice. And I saw that there was this human dimension that was the nursing practice, but there's also this military dimension. And this nursing practice, you had both your individual, but you also had to deliver it as a team because you're not doing anything alone. It's really this whole group. But it was very much nurse-driven. I mean, 2 nurses and 3 techs for 100 patients. No doctors on board that flight. You know, they have now critical care teams that augment it, but at the time they didn't. They did. They were just beginning. And then we had this military dimension of doing the missions, looking at the outcomes, really focused on what are the results overall in a much grander scheme. There's this complete focus on the patient and the transport, and very much within a global community. When I went to war, it was definitely multinational and with different countries. So this was the depiction that we came out with in terms of a model for practice. And this is for aeromedical evacuation, that nurses would have education and training. They had to know the AE culture and operations because you were flight crew and you were checked out as flight crew. And there was like 200 items you had to be checked out on. And it was very intensive training to operate in this environment. But then you're also within this whole Air Force culture. And you also had a military culture, which included multi-militaries of different areas. And then you go into this fog of war where there is so much uncertainty and you do not know what's going to happen. You're there to pick up the wounded. So you have these AE crews come in and then they move the patient out. And that was sort of a depiction of this practice. And then I put it together so that was happening with the focus being there. That was sort of the model. Some of the conclusions that came out was that we did see it as a unique subspecialty of military nursing and that there were specialized skills and competencies. Caring was incredibly prevalent in this because, and I think I don't want to diminish that in any way because there is a lot of skill and there's a lot of competency and there's a lot of focus on the mission, but there's also a lot of sacrifice that the nurses and techs and everybody in that environment does to take care of the person. And what I've come to recently, which is not part of this presentation, is I'm going to call this service beyond self because it is service and it is beyond on the self in giving it. Leadership had a great impact, a lot of complexity in integrating operations. lots of lines of authority and communication, and there's a very personal nature to that experience that was part of their practice. And it wasn't just in combat. I mean, they also did this. This was in Hurricane Katrina. This is an old set of slides, but they set up in the airplane, or they would just evacuate people from Katrina sitting on the ground in one of the military airplanes. So some of the quotes from the nurses in this is that all military nurses were expected to be leaders. This is patient care in hostile environments and under fire that required higher levels of coordination. And you had to have this ability to leave at a moment's notice and fly somewhere and set up shop. You had to adapt to austere environments and long hours and adjustment to time. So these are some other quotes. All these in italics are quotes. No comparison to civilian nursing. All the following are different. The working environment, the living conditions, the supply availability, personal time. Fog of war is unique. And this strong sense of leadership, commitment, and integrity, and a culture of global significance. So what came out, these were some of the categories that emerged, is this patient care and focus, the resources that were needed, whether it was personnel, equipment, supplies, and not just for the patient, but also for the care team, moving, and this ability to transport a large number of patients long distance, and triage to prioritize care, because sometimes you did not have all the resources. You had this leadership and expeditionary diplomacy, because in a lot of ways you were acting as a statesman from the United States and had to represent the United States. And you had to manage assets, assume command. You had to network. You had these inter-operating operations and also intra-operating within the service. And you had to work autonomously and draw on a lot of things. There's the mission to protect and defend. You really had to be committed and be willing to sacrifice. And then you had to return home and re-engage with family and adapt to a whole new environment. So one of the theories, these are some of the constructs for a theory that came out of it. That love of country, a love of life, and a belief in the ideals of the mission allowed the military nurse to function in multiple roles within challenging human and environmental contexts for an overarching goal of accomplishing a patient care mission. And that the individual and team provide healthcare within a military system. They apply practical wisdom, very pragmatic area, and a variety of ways of knowing and dynamic relationships with the patient, the team, diverse individual groups, and multiple bureaucracies within a global community. So that is a little, I'd love to get your feedback. What do you think? Wait a minute, I'm unmuting you.
That is amazing. Definitely amazing. Sorry, I keep trying to hide around here. I actually had to stay at work so I would be driving right now, so I had to stay at work, and I'm trying to find a cave or a hidey hole where I can go. So sorry for the crazy background.
That's all right.
Now I'm going to our MA station.
It's great that you can check it around.
There we go. Yeah. Yeah. I have to say, I don't know how you did that.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. Right.
Right. Like the all the different layers and like how to sort of how to even come about developing it. That's where I with all of these theories, like I guess I just get, I don't want to say overwhelmed because I'm not in that process, but I can see where it would be overwhelming, and I don't know how the process works. I can't wrap my head around how the whole process works.
I can't either.
Perfect.
That's why I asked you. No, but I'm working on it and I'm trying. So I don't want to pretend to have all the answers. I do not. But I did see, at least with mine, or like what I'm working on, that I saw something that wasn't explained by a theory of practice, and was, to me, a very different area of practice that was unique, and doesn't have the recognition. So it started out with trying to describe the nursing practice, which I would say is a practice-based theory for flight nursing, for aeromedical evacuation. But then the next step is, how do you extract and come out of that to a greater view? Because the constructs actually apply to all of military nursing. And then as I'm working on this now a little bit more, and I finally labeled it, I found the, what I want to call it, of service beyond self. I find that it would apply to maybe Red Cross nurses or other nurses that are giving in a different way, or maybe within a global context, or working outside the box. So but I think it has implications for a much higher level. But I did come to it through research. So that's how I started with mine. As I started with research, the categories emerged, and then
right.
And I didn't do it alone. I mean, I had a team.
Right. And how long have you been engaged in this?
Well, a long time, because I dropped it for many years. I think I got the grant in 2003, 2004. It didn't really finish till like maybe 2006 or 7, and then life intervened. And I did a whole host of other things and didn't really ever come back to the theory piece of it until recently. And then recently I'm going, I really need to publish that. But, part of it too is that I've developed this new program at the University of Colorado in veteran and military healthcare, because I see that it is a unique specialty in nursing. So if I'm creating this clinical specialty in nursing, I'm going, okay, well, now I'm reaching back to the theory, and how can I even articulate more why this is a unique specialty, and why I'm training nurses to take care of our vets and our service members. So some of it relates to the work that I've come to in my life of creating this clinical specialty in nursing, but then also trying to delve back into my theory. So I'm picking it up again.
And I think that's so interesting, because looking at the different stages in your own life and how those affect your perceptions and the further development of your theory, I think is really interesting. And that's something I noticed with all these theorists, is that this was not something they created overnight. It was through these processes and through these engagements that they had, and these clinical questions, or these deficits, and over time they've sort of pieced them together. And I think that's so fascinating. Just looking at it from kind of your life's perspective, and how that plays such an important role in it.
Thank you.
How many people did you have in your team?
Sorry.
That's okay. I will show you the team. I have to go back and uncount myself, because not a lot of people stayed with me, but I'm going to go back to that slide and share the slide so you can see it. So there was me and Martha Turner. She was one of my bosses in the military, and just a dynamic woman, and actually is responsible for writing and really compiling the new American Nurses Association Statement on Ethics. She's an ethicist. So she was my co-PI on the study, and Marilyn Ray, D. Ray, she was my mentor, and she was great. I mean, she had developed a theory. She was Martha's mentor. So, I was the youngest. Martha's like 12 years older, and then Marilyn's like another 10 years older. And we were like 3 generations. But Colonel Turner, Martha Turner, was not a flight nurse. Marilyn Ray had been a flight nurse in the Vietnam era. So that was like really beautiful to have her input throughout all of this and her experiences. Colonel Stowe at the time was one of the medical directors for air medical evacuation in the whole Air Force. And then when she left that position, she became the medical director for the Air Force Reserve. And 70% of the air medical evacuation capability is in the reserve. It's not, and actually 70% is reserve, 20% is guard, and less than 10% is active duty. So the reserve and the guard really own the air medical evacuation. And Martha Stowe became the director of the medical directorate for the Air Force Reserve. And actually that's a position I held too for a while, for a couple years at the Pentagon. Major Cheatwood was somebody I flew with at one of the things. Claire Hausman was retired Army. I really wanted to get some Army perspective in there. And at the time I was teaching at Old Dominion University and she was there. Stacy Plichta was a biostatistician that we had on the project. And Elizabeth Vogel was my project manager. So that was the people on the team. And then we would engage with all the people that we went to see at the different flying squadrons. I had flown both active duty and reserve at 3 different flying squadrons. So I had a really good basis that way. And I was also had been an Air Force health inspector, like an IG, Inspector General, for the air medical evacuation squadrons. So between doing this research where I went to like 8 squadrons, I had flown at 3 squadrons, and then I inspected all these other squadrons. I probably have walked almost every squadron in the Air Force for air medical evacuation. You know, so that was part of my team. But it's something I knew well, you know, or I came to know it over 10 years of practice in that realm. 22 years in the Air Force, but in that particular, as flying nurse, you know, that. So I really actually do appreciate your comments about that it is integrated with your life and it comes over time. Because at times I wish I did this faster, or I had made it happen earlier, or why am I not sitting down and writing papers? But it is part of, you know, your life experiences and what you see. And when I came to develop the program of the veteran military healthcare, I had lots of different roles in the military by then, where I did end up being a medical advisor to the Secretary of the Air Force, did work at the Pentagon as the director of the Medical Reserve, the medical director for the whole Air Force Reserve. Whoa. That's a $2 billion budget. Don't let me get in my way. I know it's noisy there. And I had been an inspector, I'd been an educator. I also did international health, and I went around to all these different countries. I was a commander. I had been a frontline flight nurse, a frontline trauma nurse. I had a lot of great different experiences. I had also been married to a man who was kicking down the door in Fallujah and doing special operations and had PTSD, and so I saw the family perspective. I had cancer several times. I saw the patient perspective. So I think when I saw the system as a whole from so many different areas, I could put it together in a much different way. And I think that took time to have that life, you know, those 20, 30 years of experience. But I started.
I think that's what makes a great theory.
So yeah, I really appreciate that you gave me the chance to share it, because I wasn't coming to class thinking I was going to share it tonight, but I'm glad I did, because I was really interested in talking about how do you develop this and how do you think about it. And I think a lot of it is what's your philosophy for practice, and which is going to be your, like, one of your next assignments. How do you think and how do you see your practice as a nurse? It's a pretty special
Mhm.
thing. Do you feel there's been any
Yeah,
difference?
absolutely.
Do you think it'll be any different as an advanced practice nurse for you, or if you're already there?
I think so. I see it, um, you know, kind of as I mentioned earlier, just having a better understanding of these theories and knowing that this is what it sort of drives my practice intrinsically, I think has just been really fascinating, and it makes me approach my patients in a similar way, but now with a little deeper understanding that the way I interact and the way I come up with my diagnoses and the way I describe my treatment plans is rooted in these care models, in some of the theories that we've learned. I think Jean Watson, I was just blown away by her theory, and so much of that resonated with me as an APRN. And then even Susan, how do you say her name? Hagerberger?
Hagedorn, I think.
Hagedorn, thank you. I don't have it written down in front of me. But that was especially cool to see that her kind of theory is really geared toward the APRN in a clinical practice. And so so much of what she talked about really resonated with me, and with how I function as a nurse practitioner.
Cool. That's wonderful. Maria, do you think, where are you at now? What are you thinking?
Don't know. What was the question again? I was getting kicked out of the lounge.
So, as an advanced practice nurse, do you feel like it'll be any different for you, like applying this theory, or maybe different from the medical model, or how you go forward? Or is it different even from your baccalaureate to now getting a more graduate degree?
I think it's definitely affected me the way I look as a nurse. I'm just more conscientious, but I think when I look into the future as an advanced practitioner, I think that knowing this knowledge will help me before I actually start being an NP, will help me kind of have an idea, okay, this is how I want to practice, this is how I want to be. So I think it's been very beneficial for both who I am right now and who I plan to be in the future. I would have never thought that, like, again, theory's so new to me, I would have never thought that I could put two and two together. But because I can see that connection now, I can actually see how beneficial and useful it's going to be for later on in life, for me at least.
Yeah. It's interesting to have a theory-guided practice, and think about, like, what is guiding your practice. So I was thinking earlier, what would you say is like one of your most memorable moments in nursing, and why?
Oh my gosh.
Mine was actually in nursing school.
Mm-hmm.
It was my first semester, and I had been doing clinicals, and this lady was going to go into having surgery, and I could tell something was going on. And so I decided to take the time to talk to her, and I found out that she had never had a chance to talk to anyone with her family. Nobody knew what was really going on. She hadn't spoken to her son in a couple years. And so I realized, well, obviously not the birth, but I realized how important it was for her to have that emotional support. And at that same time, I knew surgery wasn't going to go too well. So I knew there was that chance that she may never get to build that connection again. So I went to the nurse's station and I started Googling. I actually found her son and I helped them communicate, because I knew that no matter what the outcome was, she was going to go into that surgery in a more positive light. And let's be honest, mind over matter. We know that if we can help them be in the right emotional and mentally right frame, then that's easier for a better outcome. So it's unique mind. I mean, I've had so many experiences, but that's one that actually stayed with me a lot. And I realized that it's not just nursing itself. It's not just caring for the physical aspects of the person, but rather looking at them as a whole. And I realized something was wrong. Something was missing. Unfortunately, she actually did pass away, but I felt so honored that I could, at least before that happened, I could give her some joy. And I think she went into surgery much more peacefully, and I just remember how much it meant to her. So that's something that stayed with me. And it made me realize patients are not just numbers. They're not just a disease. There's so much more to them. And the emotional aspect and psychological aspect is so, so important. And this is why I love theory, because these theorists looked at that. They're able to see, no, patients aren't just numbers. There is so much more to being a nurse, to providing care. And like I said, that's why I think I'm enjoying this class so much, because everything is starting to make sense about who I am now, who I'm going to be in the future. And then I can actually look back at my past experience and say, wow, never thought I was looking at it that way, but here I am doing it.
Yep.
But that's me.
That's great.
Yeah, that's a great story. That's a really great story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it really speaks so true to nurses. I think that there's just as my colleague, she's another nurse practitioner at my clinic, and we always joke with the physicians that nurse practitioners care just a little bit more than physicians. And so that's why we provide kind of a different type of care. But I think that's a great example of that, just sort of looking outside of that medical model of here's disease, here's how we're going to fix it, but looking at that, taking that more holistic approach. It's huge, really important part. I think that in terms of, profound moment in my career, I can't think of one off the top of my head I can think of a lot, but I will say one thing that has really stuck with me is when I first became a nurse practitioner, I was talking to some friends and kind of colleagues, nursing colleagues from when I was working at the hospital, and we were talking about diagnosing and treatment plans and all of that, and kind of a roundtable discussion, if you will. And I was kind of giving a hypothetical situation about a patient and explaining how my approach, I really like to discuss my treatment plan, at least the ideas that I have with my patients, and really get their feedback and almost let them sort of choose, like, here are your options. Which one do you think fits best for your situation? And somebody responded in the sense like, well, that, I don't think that's a really great type of care, because they're seeking you for advice and they're looking for you to tell them what to do. And I remember being like, I look at it so differently. I look at it as a collaboration. They're not looking for me to tell them what to do. They're looking, in my opinion, to be empowered so that they can make the best decision for themselves. And I think that's a big difference between the medical model and the nursing model, is that we really focus on that and steer away from that idea of, physician is all knowing, patient must obey that treatment plan. And it's something I feel very strongly about. So I'd say that would be one of my moments.
That's great.
You bring up such a good point. Yeah, you bring up such a good point in the sense of, I think from nursing, from right from the beginning, again, we look at everything as a whole. Like working with the doctor I do, you know, he's all about, this is the diagnosis, this is going to be the treatment, and he talks to them, and then he walks out, and then I stay in there, and I'm like, how do you feel about this? What do you think about this? I ask them, do you have questions? And a lot of times, well, I work in oncology, so a lot of times that's when the tears come out and those emotions come out. And it's kind of like this unspoken understanding between me and my doctor where, okay, you get your part done, now let me take care of the patient in my way and make sure that when they leave this appointment, they're not leaving confused, upset, or anything like that. I want them to step out the door and be like, oh, okay. They're looking at it, this is what I need treatment, but I also know I have the support of the nurse. I have the supportive palliative team. Like, I guess maybe that's just the nurses in us. We look at the whole, and that's what provides great balance. Because I would do the same thing. I would say, hey, I have these suggestions. How do you want to approach them? Because that empowers the patient. And that's really, really important. I don't feel like doctors get that. No dissing, because I love my doctor.
Right.
But I just don't think they get that. And that's just my personal opinion.
Yeah. And what's the point of working with a patient if you're not going to take their feedback? If you prescribe a plan and you say, okay, you need to start this medication, this medication, this medication. Yeah, you don't have money. Okay, well, you'll just have to figure that out, or you don't have the resources, or you don't have, et cetera. The patient's not going to benefit from that whatsoever. And so it is so important to really look at it from their perspective and have that conversation. What works for you? All of my patients that smoke, every single time they come in, I'm like, okay, I'm going to ask, like, how's the smoking going? It's fine, Katie. I'm like, do you want to talk about quitting? I've got some great ideas. And they're like, no, we're good. And there's no point in me being a jerk about it and hounding them, because nobody's going to change unless they want to. And nobody's going to adopt a plan unless it sounds appropriate to them. And I think that's an important part of it. And I agree. I think it's really ingrained in nurse. I think it's just innate, where the physicians don't really have that as much. not to say no physicians do, but it's just a different type of care, different model.
Well, and I agree with both of you, and I think you're bringing out such great points, because nursing is like 24/7. I mean, it may not just be us, it may be the person after us, but we get to be with the patient for a much longer period of time. So you have a very different interaction. It's not just like, I'm going to come in and intervene and go. I'm going to support you. I'm going to have this linkage with you. I'm going to have more of a relationship, and so I think you do empower them, like you were saying, Maria. But you do form this relationship that you're talking about, Katie. And I have so many stories too. When I think about what's my most memorable moment, like so many things come up. But one of the ones I was thinking about was I had this patient. I was working as a trauma nurse in a level 1 facility, and it was a military hospital, but it had like over 1,000 beds. But it was also a community hospital, because they wanted everybody to work on like gunshot wounds and stab wounds and things that they might see in combat. So we had this lady from the community that had been stabbed in the neck, and she was like, I want to say in her 70s, and they took her to that, surgery, because it was the middle of the night or whatever, came to my unit, and I was taking care of her. And, she woke up and was all freaked out. And I don't know how I knew, but somehow somebody had told me or something. She had never been in a hospital in her whole life. And here she was, stabbed in the neck and on a ventilator, and like totally anxious. And I just remember talking to her and explaining every single thing, and like just trying to really, try to make it easy and mellow as best I could, and try to let her to settle down. Well, this is going to breathe for you, just explaining what had happened. And I talked a lot, and I don't normally always do that. I like to sort of listen or let people rest. But she calmed down, and she was great. in the morning, I found out she didn't speak any English. And I had been talking to her in English the whole time. And
That is awesome.
I know. And it really made me feel like
But you know what?
language doesn't matter. It is that presence.
Language doesn't play a role.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I think that
It was the fact that you were there.
Yeah. I had one patient who told me one time, he goes, "You still have the milk of loving kindness in you." You know, he'd had so many bad experiences, and I was like, "Oh, thank you." You know, it's so great. But it was a really, I think we do get to be in a very different position sometimes than a physician that is prescribing. And I think that comes back into this caring philosophy, these other models of nursing practice. So, and I think it does help to look back on our special moments and think about what made them special for us, because that's where we can draw from and go, okay, well, this is something I think is important in the way I provide care. So, well, gosh, do you realize that we've gone a whole hour already? It's like been great.
Funny. Wow.
So that was wonderful.
Well, it's been great.
Yeah, it has been. Any last thoughts from you guys?
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your stories and your background, and thank you in general. What you do is just amazing, and it looked like a very tough job. I don't think I could fly in a plane being only 3 nurses and that many patients, but it obviously means it takes a special kind of person, and we need a lot more people like that. So thank you for sharing your.
Thank you. Thank you. Katie, any last thoughts?
No, I just appreciate it. It's nice to be able to kind of chat with you in person and meet another classmate. And like I said earlier, I've really enjoyed this class. I feel like the assignments are really appropriate. I'm learning a ton. I mean, it's very engaging. I think it's great. So thank you very much.
Awesome. Well, I'm learning from you too, and I really appreciate it. And thanks for coming on tonight. And I'll see you back in class.
Awesome.
Alrighty. Have a good night, y'all.
All right. Enjoy the night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.